The tribunal chamber was a cathedral of judgment. Envoy Elena Vasquez stood alone on a hovering dais, surrounded by a ring of alien delegates representing the 12 dominant civilizations of the Galactic Assembly. The architecture was designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings had disappeared into darkness, lighting that cast shadows like accusations and silence so thick it felt like a living thing pressing against her chest. She had been standing there for 4 hours. Her legs trembled. Her throat felt like sandpaper. But she kept her spine straight and her expression carved from stone. She had rehearsed this moment during the 3-month voyage to Convergence Hub. Deep down, she had known this day would bring nothing but ruin. The Krythax Prime, Vornak, rose from his seat. His species resembled armored arthropods, 8 limbs ending in bladed appendages, carapace gleaming like polished obsidian. When he spoke, his voice emerged from the translation matrix as glacial and precise. The Galactic Assembly has concluded its deliberation, Vornak announced, mandibles clicking with each syllable. Humanity stands guilty of territorial aggression, unchecked adaptation, and unauthorized occupation of 23 contested systems. These transgressions demand consequence. Elena's heart plummeted, though her face betrayed nothing. Behind her, she heard the sharp intake of breath from her attaches. They had all hoped, foolishly, for mercy. The sentence is as follows, Vornak continued, and Elena could have sworn she detected satisfaction in his mechanized tone. Humanity shall withdraw from all territories beyond the solar perimeter. You are granted 60 standard cycles to complete this evacuation. Any human presence beyond your origin system after this deadline will be treated as an act of war. 60 years. 3 centuries of expansion. The gardens of New Eden. The mining outposts of the Crimson Drift. The thriving colony where her brother raised his family. All of it gone. Erased by bureaucratic decree. Furthermore, Vornak said, and dread coiled tight around Elena's chest, humanity is hereby barred from accessing the Assembly trade networks, the hyperlane communication grid, and all interspecies commerce. Your kind will remain quarantined until you demonstrate capacity for civilized coexistence. You're sentencing us to extinction, Elena said quietly, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Without trade, without resources beyond the solar perimeter, we cannot sustain our population. You know this. A different voice responded, gentler, almost regretful. The Lumini delegate, Dacera, resembled a bioluminescent plant, her petals shifting through colors as she spoke. Perhaps humanity should have considered survival before expanding so recklessly. You encroached upon territories claimed by elder species. You extracted resources without authorization. You showed contempt for protocols established across millennia. We filed claims, Elena countered, ice forming in her voice. We followed procedures. We waited for responses that never came. Silence can be interpreted as consent. Silence demonstrates patience. Vornak snapped. Your species comprehends nothing of patience. You have existed in this galaxy for 3 brief centuries. Some of us have maintained civilizations for millions of years. You are infants wielding tools you cannot understand. Elena wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them that humanity had fought for every kilometer of space they occupied, that while these ancient species had grown complacent in their power, humans had clawed their way up from nothing with determination and ingenuity. But she was a diplomat. She had trained for this. She swallowed her rage and changed tactics. I invoke the right of appeal, Elena said formally. Under Protocol 71 of the Assembly Charter, any member species may present additional evidence and arguments. Denied, Vornak said immediately. The Assembly has spoken. The judgment is irreversible. On what grounds do you deny a charter right? Elena demanded. On the grounds that humanity has proven itself unworthy of charter protections, answered another delegate, a Vexian, floating in its containment sphere like a sentient storm cloud. You demand rights while shirking responsibilities. You claim persecution while committing expansion. The Assembly has shown remarkable tolerance toward your species. Elena studied the circle of faces, or face equivalents. Most wouldn't meet her gaze. A few looked uncomfortable. But Vornak stared at her with unmistakable triumph. She understood then. This had been his objective from the beginning. The Krythax wanted humanity removed as competition, and Vornak had spent years building the coalition to make it happen. I see, Elena said softly. Then let me clarify what you've accomplished today. You haven't simply exiled humanity. You've created an adversary, because we will not perish quietly. We will not dissolve into memory. Humans do not surrender. Bold declarations from a species facing extinction. Vornak said dismissively, your defiance changes nothing. In 60 years, humanity will be a cautionary tale told to ambitious young species. You've made a critical error, Elena said, her voice cold and crystalline. You assume that because we're young, we're fragile. You assume that because we're small, we'll shatter. You're mistaken. Humans adapt. We survive. We prevail. And we remember those who wronged us. Are you threatening this assembly? Vornak asked sharply. No, Elena said. I'm making a promise. You will regret this decision. Perhaps not immediately. Perhaps not for decades. But eventually you'll look back on this moment and wish you had chosen wisdom over fear. Remove her, Vornak ordered. The assembly has wasted sufficient time on this primitive species. Security drones advance, weapons charged but not aimed. Elena turned and walked toward the exit with her head held high, her staff following in stunned silence. At the threshold, Elena turned back one final time. One more thing, she called across the chamber. You're redistributing our colonies among yourselves, correct? Dividing the worlds we built, the stations we engineered, the resources we discovered. Those territories will be administered by species who understand proper protocols, Desera said. Then enjoy them, Elena said, because they were all constructed by humans who bled and sacrificed to make them habitable. And I hope that every time you walk through our corridors, you remember that you stole them from people whose only crime was wanting a future. She left before anyone could respond. In the corridor outside, Elena finally allowed herself to feel. Her hands shook. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. Her staff gathered around her, looking for guidance, for hope, for anything that might make this catastrophe seem less absolute. Fleet Commander Lucia Markov waited at the corridor's end. She was tall, gray-haired, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent 40 years in the void. She had commanded humanity's defense fleet for 2 decades. She took one look at Elena's face and understood everything. That bad? Lucia asked quietly. Worse, Elena said. Total exile. 60 years to evacuate everything beyond solar perimeter. Trade embargo, communication blackout. They want us dead without the courage to kill us directly. Lucia was silent for a long moment. Then she straightened her shoulders and looked Elena directly in the eyes. Then we don't die, she said simply. We adapt. We endure. And then we make them regret ever underestimating us. How? Elena asked. They control every trade route. They control the hyperlane network. They have resources and technology we can barely imagine. What do we have? We have something they lost eons ago, Lucia said. We have the will to fight. We have innovation born from necessity. We have the knowledge that we're starting from nothing, which means we have nowhere to go but up. She paused, glancing around to ensure privacy. And we have Dr. Reeves. Elena blinked. Cassandra? What does she have to do with this? She's been developing something. A classified project the Assembly doesn't know about. Alternative faster-than-light technology that doesn't rely on their hyperlane network. She believes she's close to a breakthrough. Lucia leaned closer. I wasn't authorized to tell anyone yet, but I think you need to know. We're not helpless. Elena, we have options. For the first time since entering that terrible chamber, Elena felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. How long until she has something operational? 12 years. Maybe less if we dedicate resources. 12 years, Elena repeated. And then what? Even with independent FTL, what do we do? The Assembly will still be larger, stronger, more advanced. Then we spend the next 60 years getting stronger, Lucia said quietly. In secret, if necessary. We use the time they've given us to prepare. They think they're forcing us into extinction. Instead, They're giving us time to become something they can't ignore or dismiss. Elena studied her carefully. You're planning something. Something beyond survival. Lucia smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. I'm planning to ensure humanity never kneels again. I'm planning to show the galaxy that exiling us was their greatest mistake. She leaned even closer. I'm taking part of the fleet and disappearing. The outer colonies don't need to be abandoned if the Assembly never finds them. We'll go dark. Build in secret. Prepare. That's mutiny, Elena said softly. Technically, I should arrest you right now. Are you going to? Elena thought about it. She thought about her brother's family on New Eden. She thought about all the humans who would lose everything because of today's verdict. She thought about Vornak's smug certainty that humanity would crumble. No, she finally said, I'm not going to arrest you. Instead, I'll return to Earth and publicly condemn your actions. I'll make a theatrical show of hunting you, and I'll ensure no one ever finds you until you're ready. Lucia nodded slowly. It might take decades. You might not live to see the payoff. I don't care, Elena said. As long as humanity survives, that's enough. As long as we get our chance to prove ourselves, I can die satisfied. She extended her hand. Good luck, Commander. Give them hell. Lucia shook her hand firmly. Count on it, Envoy. And in 60 years, when we're ready, we're going to remind the Galactic Assembly why they should have destroyed us when they had the chance. They parted ways in that corridor. Elena headed toward the diplomatic transport that would return her to Earth. Lucia headed toward the military docks where her fleet waited. Neither looked back. Everything had changed. The comfortable era of humanity cautiously expanding into a tolerant galaxy was finished. The age of human exile had begun, and with it, the seeds of something far more dangerous were planted. The Galactic Assembly had tried to eliminate a competitor. Instead, they had created their own nightmare. They had given humanity a reason to become stronger, smarter, and more determined than any species in galactic history. They had made the mistake of cornering humans. And like all prey-turned-predator, humans were most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. The first ships began arriving back at the solar perimeter within 7 months of the Assembly's verdict. They came in waves, hundreds at a time, carrying families who had packed entire lives into cargo holds. People born on distant worlds were seeing Earth for the first time. Children wept. Adults tried to remain strong, but often failed. The largest human migration in history was not one of hope and discovery, but defeat and exile. Dr. Cassandra Reeves watched the incoming ships from her laboratory on lunar station Athena. She hadn't left the moon in 9 months. She couldn't afford to. Her work was too critical, too urgent, too necessary for humanity's survival. While politicians on Earth debated crisis management strategies, while military leaders planned defensive positions around the solar perimeter, Cassandra worked 20-hour days trying to crack the problem that would determine humanity's future. She was trying to break physics, or at least find a way around it that didn't rely on the Assembly's technology. The Assembly's hyperlane network used what they called null-void corridors, artificially maintained tunnels through higher dimensions allowing faster-than-light travel. The Assembly had built this network across millennia and controlled every access point. Now that humanity was severed, human ships were limited to sublight travel. A journey that once took days now took lifetimes. It wasn't sustainable. Run the simulation again, Cassandra said to her assistant, a brilliant young physicist named David Park, who had been her star pupil before the exile. Adjust the quantum field parameters by 4%. The holographic display illuminated with complex mathematical structures. Cassandra watched as virtual particles interacted in theoretically impossible ways. The simulation ran for 40 seconds, then collapsed into chaos. Failure, David said quietly. Same as the last 300 attempts. The field destabilizes when we try to scale it to ship-size dimensions. Cassandra rubbed her eyes. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. There has to be a way. The Assembly's technology proves FDL is possible. We just need to find a different path to the same destination. Maybe we're approaching this incorrectly, David suggested. The Assembly uses null void because they have massive power generation capabilities. We don't. But what if we don't need null void at all? What if there's another way to achieve FTL that requires less power? Like what? Cassandra asked, but she was already thinking. David had a gift for lateral thinking, for seeing problems from unexpected angles. Slip-fold space. David said, enthusiasm building. What if instead of forcing our way through higher dimensions, we fold between the creases in normal space? Quantum mechanics tells us particles can exist in multiple locations simultaneously until observed. What if we could make a ship do the same thing? Cassandra stared at him. The idea was insane. It violated dozens of established principles. But it was also brilliant. Show me the mathematics, she said. They worked through the night. By dawn, they had the outline of a theory that might, possibly, with considerable luck and innovation, allow humanity to travel faster than light without using the Assembly's network. It would take years to test. It might not work at all, but it was hope, and hope was the most valuable resource humanity possessed. While Cassandra labored on her impossible project, the rest of humanity struggled to adapt to their new reality. Earth wasn't prepared to absorb 4 billion returning colonists. Housing crises became catastrophic. Food production strained under unprecedented demand. The economy, already damaged by the loss of alien trade, collapsed into depression. Unemployment skyrocketed. Crime surged. Political extremists on both ends gained followers, some calling for surrender and acceptance, others demanding immediate war against the Assembly. It was the closest humanity had come to self-destruction since the nuclear standoffs of the 20th century. Envoy Elena Vasquez, now serving as Earth Secretary of Global Affairs, worked desperately to hold civilization together. She gave speeches calling for unity. She organized massive public works projects to employ returning colonists. She met with world leaders and convinced them to share resources instead of hoarding. She barely slept, barely ate, and aged 20 years in the first 3. But she also did something else, something secret. She coordinated with Commander Markov and her remnant fleet. Lucia had kept her promise. 3 weeks after the Assembly's verdict, she had taken 60 ships and vanished. The official narrative was that she'd gone rogue, that she'd stolen military vessels and fled like a criminal. Elena had publicly denounced her. She had called her a traitor. She had vowed to bring her to justice. In reality, Elena sent encrypted messages every month, passing along intelligence, resources, and volunteers. Young men and women who wanted to fight rather than surrender quietly disappeared from Earth and somehow found their way to Lucia's hidden fleet. Supply ships vanished from inventories. Weapons manufacturing facilities reported mysterious accounting discrepancies. All of it flowed out to Lucia and her growing armada. Lucia had taken her fleet to the far edges of human space, to systems the Assembly had never bothered charting carefully. There, in the darkness between stars, she built secret bases. She trained crews in guerrilla tactics. She prepared for a war that might not come for decades. And she kept the outer colonies alive. New Eden, Crimson Station, Haven's Reach, and dozens of other human worlds were supposed to be evacuated. But when Assembly inspection teams arrived to verify compliance, they found abandoned facilities and empty habitats. They assumed humanity had obeyed the exile order. They didn't know that the colonists had simply moved underground, or that they maintained contact with Lucia's fleet, or that they continued mining resources and building infrastructure in complete secrecy. The Assembly had won the diplomatic battle, but they were losing the intelligence war without even knowing they were in one. 7 years after the exile, Dr. Reeves achieved her first successful test. A probe using her experimental slip-fold drive successfully traveled 2 light years in 5 hours. It had taken her team 7 years of failures, of dead ends, of watching colleagues give up and quit. But they had done it. Humanity now had a path forward. When Elena received the news, she wept. It was the first time she had cried since the day of the verdict. How long until you can scale it up to a crude ship? Elena asked Cassandra during a secure call. 3 years for a prototype. 7 years for mass production. 15 years before we could have a fleet. Cassandra looked exhausted but triumphant. But Elena, there's something else. Something I discovered while working on the slip-fold equations. What is it? The Assembly's null-void network. I've been studying their public technical documentation to understand how their system works, so we could avoid it, and I found something. A vulnerability. A massive flaw in their network architecture that they either don't know about or think is impossible to exploit. Elena leaned forward. What kind of vulnerability? The kind that could let us shut down their entire FTL network. Or, better yet, let us take control of it. Cassandra's smile was fierce. They built their network assuming no one else had advanced quantum mathematics. But we do, and we can see things in their system that they cannot. Don't do anything yet, Elena warned. We're not ready. We need at least another decade, maybe two, before we can risk open conflict. I know, Cassandra said. I'm just saying that when the time comes, we'll have options. They think they have all the power because they control the network. They're wrong. 15 years after the exile, humanity had stabilized. The crisis had passed. People had adapted to the new reality. Earth and the inner system worlds were crowded but functional. A new generation was growing up with stories about the injustice of the exile, raised to be stronger and smarter than their parents. Schools emphasized science and engineering. Military recruitment reached unprecedented levels. Humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. They were preparing. Lucia's remnant fleet had grown from 60 ships to 12,000. Some were military vessels, but most were civilian ships converted to military purposes. Mining barges with weapons welded to their hulls. Colony transports refitted as troop carriers. Even luxury yachts transformed into fast attack craft. It wasn't a pretty fleet, but it was large, experienced, and angry, and Lucia had trained them exceptionally well. The key to Lucia's strategy was information. She had spent years cultivating contacts among alien species outside the Assembly's inner circle. One species in particular, the Zendari, had become valuable allies. The Zendari were refugees from a war the Assembly had failed to prevent. They harbored no affection for the Assembly and were happy to share intelligence with humanity. Through the Zendari, Lucia learned about Assembly military deployments. She learned about their economic troubles. She learned about growing dissatisfaction among younger species tired of the Assembly's rigid control. Most importantly, she learned that the Assembly wasn't the unified force they pretended to be. Internal politics and ancient grudges divided them. Some species barely spoke to each other. They were vulnerable. They had been comfortable for so long they'd forgotten how to actually fight. Lucia told her senior officers during a strategy session aboard her flagship, the Phoenix Rising. Their fleets are mostly ceremonial. Their tactics are outdated. They rely on technological advantage. But that gap is closing. What about the Crythax? Asked her second-in-command, Captain Yuki Tanaka. They pushed hardest for our exile. They won't just let us return. The Crythax are insects, Lucia said bluntly, literally and strategically. They think in terms of swarm tactics, overwhelming numbers, rigid hierarchy. We can outthink them. We can outmaneuver them. We can defeat them. When do we move? Tanaka asked. Not yet, Lucia said. We have 45 years until the exile deadline. We use that time. We build more ships. We train more crews. We perfect our tactics. And when the 60th year arrives, we don't ask permission to return. We take our place in the galaxy by force, and we dare them to stop us. 25 years after the exile, something unexpected happened. A young Crythax officer named Zevrik defected to humanity. He arrived in a stolen scout ship at one of Lucia's hidden bases and requested asylum. When questioned about abandoning his people, Zevrik said something that gave Lucia hope. Because you were right, Zevrik said to his translator, what the Assembly did to humanity was unjust. I have studied your species. You weren't aggressive. You were simply successful, and we punish you for it because we feared what you might become. He paused. I'm not the only one who believes this. There are others from many species who think the exile was a mistake. We're just afraid to speak up. Why are you speaking up now? Lucia asked, because I've been watching. I know about your hidden fleet. I know about your secret colonies. And I know you're planning something. When you make your move, you'll need allies. You'll need people who understand how the assembly operates from the inside. I want to help." Lucia studied the young alien carefully. It could be a trap. It could be an assembly intelligence operation. But her instinct said otherwise. Zevrik seemed genuine. More than that, he seemed desperate to be on the right side of history. "All right," Lucia said finally. "You can stay. But you'll be monitored. You'll be tested. And if you betray us, you'll regret it." "I understand," Zevrik said. "I only ask one thing in return. When you win, because I believe you will win, please don't destroy my people. We're not all like Vornak. Some of us just want to live in peace." "We're not conquerors," Lucia said. "We just want what was taken from us. If your people stay out of our way, we won't harm them." It was a promise Lucia intended to keep. Despite everything the Assembly had done, despite years of suffering, Lucia didn't want genocide. She wanted justice. 40 years after the exile, everything was ready. The remnant fleet numbered 12,000 ships. Earth's defenses were stronger than ever. Dr. Reeves had a plan to seize control of the Assembly's hyperlane network. Envoy Vasquez had identified potential allies among the Assembly species. Young humans who had grown up during the exile were now officers, scientists, and diplomats, all burning with determination to prove humanity's worth. Commander Lucia Markov stood on the bridge of the Phoenix, rising, and looked at the star charts. 20 more years until the deadline. 20 more years, and then they would show the galaxy what humanity had become during their exile. They would show the Assembly that trying to destroy humanity had only forged them into something stronger. They would prove that humans didn't just survive, they thrived. "Begin Operation Ascension," Lucia ordered. "Send word to all fleet elements. In 20 years, we go home, and nothing will stop us." Year 58 of the exile. The galaxy had mostly forgotten about humanity. Earth was a distant memory, a cautionary tale told to younger species about knowing their place in the galactic order. The former human colonies were now populated by Assembly-approved species. The Crythax had taken the most valuable worlds. New Eden was now a Crythax industrial hub. Crimson Station housed a Vexian administrative center. Vornak had been promoted to supreme arbiter of the Crythax sovereignty. He stood in his office on Convergence Hub and gazed out at the stars with satisfaction. The human problem had been solved. Their dangerous expansion had been halted. The galaxy was stable again, order controlled, everything as it should be. He didn't know that in 52 different star systems, human ships were moving into position. He didn't know that the empty colonies his people occupied had never truly been empty. He didn't know that the laborers and workers brought in from other species included hundreds of deep-cover human operatives. He didn't know that humanity had spent 60 years preparing for this moment. He didn't know, but he was about to learn. Fleet Commander Lucia Markov was 82 years old now. Her hair was completely silver. Her hands trembled slightly when she was tired, but her mind was sharp as ever, and her determination had only intensified with age. She stood on the bridge of the Phoenix, rising, surrounded by officers young enough to be her grandchildren, and prepared to give the order that would change galactic history. "All ships report ready, Commander," Captain Tanaka said. She was 68 herself now, but still as capable as the day she joined the remnant fleet. "We have confirmation from all 52 strike teams. They're in position and awaiting your command." Lucia looked at the tactical display. 12,000 ships spread across half the galaxy, all hidden from Assembly sensors by Dr. Reeves' slipfold technology. 52 Assembly military outposts about to be hit simultaneously. Communication hubs, supply depots, patrol bases, all targeted for capture rather than destruction. This wasn't about killing. This was about sending a message. "Dr. Reeves," Lucia said, turning to the elderly scientist who stood at a specialized console. She was in her 90s now, but she had insisted on being present for this moment. "Are you ready to take down their network?" "I've been ready for 40 years, Cassandra said with a slight smile. "The Assembly's hyperlane network is about to become humanity's hyperlane network. They won't even know what hit them until it's too late." "Envoy Vasquez," Lucia said, looking at the communication screen where Elena's face appeared. She was broadcasting from Earth, looking older but no less determined. "Are you ready to make the announcement?" "I have my speech prepared," Elena said. "As soon as you begin the strikes, I'll broadcast every inhabited world in the galaxy. They need to understand why we're doing this. They need to know that this isn't aggression, it's justice." Lucia took a deep breath. 60 years of preparation came down to this moment. 60 years of sacrifice, of loss, of humanity suffering in silence while they built the strength to return. She thought about all the people who had died during the exile, who had never lived to see this day. She thought about her own daughter, killed in an accident on a colony ship during the early evacuation. This was for them. This was for everyone the Assembly had wronged. All ships, Lucia said clearly. Execute Operation Homecoming. Show them what humanity has become. Across the galaxy, 12,000 ships dropped out of slipfold space at exactly the same moment. They appeared without warning, bypassing every sensor and defense system the Assembly possessed. Within minutes, 52 military outposts were under siege. Human forces move with precision and overwhelming speed. They had rehearsed these maneuvers thousands of times. Every officer knew their role. Every ship knew its position. The Battle of Crimson Reach was the most critical engagement. A Krythax armada of 400 ships was stationed there, guarding what had once been human territory. Lucia had assigned 3,000 ships to this battle, and they came from multiple vectors using tactics the Krythax had never seen before. The Krythax tried to respond with their standard swarm tactics, moving in coordinated formations. But human ships broke apart into small independent units that struck from unexpected angles. When the Krythax concentrated their forces to crush one group, more groups would attack from behind. When they tried to retreat to defensive positions, human ships would slipfold directly into their retreat path. It was chaos. It was beautiful. It was everything Lucia had trained her people to do. Captain Tanaka led the fighter squadrons personally. Her ship, the Retribution, danced through Krythax formations like a predator among prey. She targeted their command ships specifically, severing communication and coordination. Without their rigid command structure, Krythax forces became confused and disorganized. Enemy flagship attempting to escape, her tactical officer reported. "They're heading for the Novoid corridor." "Cut them off," Tanaka ordered. "I want that ship captured, not destroyed. We need prisoners who can tell us about Assembly fleet deployments." For human destroyers slipfolded ahead of the Krythax flagship and blocked its escape route. The flagship tried to fight, but it was designed for fleet actions, not close combat. Within 2 hours, human boarding teams had taken control. The Krythax commander surrendered rather than see his entire crew killed in pointless resistance. Simultaneously, Dr. Reeves executed her part of the plan. From her console aboard the Phoenix Rising, she transmitted carefully crafted quantum signals into the Assembly's hyperlane network. These signals exploited the vulnerability she had discovered decades earlier. The network's control systems, designed by species that didn't fully understand quantum mechanics at humanity's level, couldn't distinguish her signals from legitimate system commands. Within minutes, she had administrative access to the entire network. She could see every ship using the Novoid corridors. She could see every communication passing through the system. And most importantly, she could control who had access and who didn't. "I'm shutting down all Krythax access to the network," Cassandra announced. "They're now effectively stranded wherever they are. Any Krythax ship currently in Novoid will be forcibly ejected at their next junction point." Lucia smiled. "And the rest of the Assembly species still have access?" "For now," Cassandra said. "We want them to see what's happening. We want them to know that we could shut them down too, if we wanted. Fear and uncertainty are weapons just as powerful as guns." On Convergence Hub, Vornak stared at the emergency reports flooding his screens with growing horror. 52 outposts under attack. 400 ships defeated at Crimson Reach. The hyperlane network compromised. And now, a message broadcasting to every world in the galaxy. Envoy Elena Vasquez's face appeared on every public screen, every communication device, every display that could receive transmissions. Her voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of 60 years of injustice. "Citizens of the galaxy," Elena began. 60 years ago, the Galactic Assembly exiled humanity for the crime of being successful. They claimed we were aggressive. They claimed we were dangerous. They claimed we didn't deserve a place among civilized species. Today, we return not to ask permission, but to reclaim what was always ours. Vornak tried to shut down the broadcast, but his systems wouldn't respond. The humans had seized the communication networks too. He was forced to watch and listen as this human woman exposed everything. "The Assembly told you they were maintaining peace and order," Elena continued. "But we have evidence of what they really are. We have documents showing 4 centuries of corruption. We have recordings of Assembly members dividing resources among themselves. We have proof they deliberately suppressed technological advancement across the galaxy to maintain their own power." New screens appeared beside Elena's face, displaying document after document, recording after recording. The evidence was overwhelming. Assembly members accepting bribes, secret agreements to fix prices on essential resources, plans to crush any species that became too successful or independent, all of it exposed for the galaxy to see. "The Assembly didn't exile us to protect the galaxy," Elena said. "They exiled us because we represented a threat to their control, because we were innovating too quickly, because we were proving that their way wasn't the only way. They wanted us to die quietly so no other species would get similar ideas. On dozens of worlds, people watched in shock. Some had suspected Assembly corruption, but seeing it proven was different. Others had never questioned the Assembly's authority and were now forced to confront uncomfortable truths. Young species, those who had joined the galactic community in the last few centuries, began questioning why they should continue following a system that was so clearly broken. "Humanity spent 60 years in exile," Elena said. "We suffered. We struggled. We lost millions to the hardships imposed on us. But we didn't die. We adapted. We innovated. We became stronger. And now we return, not as the species the Assembly tried to destroy, but as something far more dangerous. We return as a species that knows the truth about the galaxy's supposed leaders." Lucia watched the broadcast from her bridge and felt pride surge through her chest. Elena had executed it perfectly. This wasn't just about military victory. This was about changing hearts and minds across the galaxy. This was about showing everyone that the Assembly could be challenged, could be defeated, could be exposed for what they truly were. "We didn't come back for revenge," Elena continued. "We came back for justice. We came back to liberate not just ourselves, but all species living under the Assembly's corrupt rule. We came back to prove that a different way is possible. A galaxy based on merit rather than ancient power structures. A galaxy based on innovation rather than stagnation. A galaxy where any species, regardless of age or influence, has the right to thrive." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The Assembly will call this an act of war. They'll tell you we're the aggressors, the criminals, the threat to galactic peace. But ask yourselves this. Who exiled an entire species for the crime of being successful? Who hoarded technology and resources while others struggled? Who built a system designed to keep themselves powerful and everyone else subservient? We are not your enemy. The Assembly is." The broadcast ended. For a moment, the galaxy was silent, processing what they had just witnessed. Then the chaos began. On Convergence Hub, Assembly members from different species began arguing, accusing each other, demanding explanations. On colony worlds, protests erupted as citizens demanded answers from their governments. On military bases, officers questioned whether they should continue taking orders from Assembly leadership. And in the former human colonies, something even more dramatic happened. The workers and laborers who had been brought in to replace humanity rose up in rebellion. Thousands of them revealed themselves as human operatives who had been living undercover for decades. They seized control of facilities, disabled defensive systems, and opened the gates for human military forces to reclaim their former homes. On New Eden, the Krythax governor was caught completely by surprise when his entire security force turned out to be humans in disguise. They had worked for him for years, always reliable, always obedient. Now they arrested him and took control of the planet's defense grid without firing a single shot. Lucia watched the reports streaming in and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Every single objective had been achieved. The Assembly's military forces were in disarray. Their communication network was compromised. Their corruption was exposed. And most importantly, humanity had proven they weren't the primitive species the Assembly had dismissed 60 years ago. "Commander, we're receiving surrender offers from 23 of the 52 outposts," Captain Tanaka reported. "The others are still fighting, but their resistance is weakening." "Accept all surrenders," Lucia ordered. "I want prisoners treated with respect and dignity. We're not savages. We're professionals who happen to be very, very good at our jobs." "What about the Krythax?" Tanaka asked. "They're requesting immediate talks." "Tell them we'll negotiate when Vornak personally comes to the table," Lucia said. "I want him to look me in the eye and admit what he did was wrong." On Earth, Elena collapsed into her chair after the broadcast ended. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, but triumphant. They had done it. After 60 years of suffering and planning, they had actually done it. Humanity was back, and this time, no one would force them into exile ever again. Her assistant brought her a message that had just arrived. It was from one of the Assembly species, the Zendari. They were formally requesting to meet with human leadership to discuss an alliance. 3 other species had sent similar requests. The Assembly was already fracturing, just as they had hoped. "It's working," Elena said softly. "Everything we planned, everything we sacrificed for, it's actually working." In his office on Convergence Hub, Vornak finally accepted the truth. The humans had won, not through brute force, though they had proven themselves capable of that, not through superior technology, though they had achieved that too. They had won through patience, through planning, through being smarter and more determined than anyone had given them credit for. He had spent 60 years believing humanity would fade away. Instead, they had used that time to become the most dangerous force in the galaxy. And now they were offering him a choice: negotiate or be destroyed, submit or be replaced, accept justice or face consequences. For the first time in his long life, Vornak felt fear. Not fear of death, but fear of being remembered as the leader who brought about his species' downfall. He had thought exiling humanity would secure his legacy. Instead, it might destroy everything his people had built. He opened a communication channel to the human fleet. "This is Supreme Arbiter Vornak. I am prepared to discuss terms." The meeting took place on neutral ground, a small space station in unclaimed territory between human and Assembly space. Fleet Commander Lucia Markov arrived with a security detail and a diplomatic team. Vornak came with his own advisors, looking diminished somehow, his carapace lacking its usual gleam. The years had not been kind to him, and recent events had aged him further. They sat across from each other in a conference room designed for multi-species interaction. The air was tense. Lucia studied the Krythax Arbiter carefully, remembering every detail of that day 60 years ago when humanity had been exiled. This creature had smiled while condemning billions of humans to suffering and possible extinction. Now he looked nervous, uncertain, defeated. "You want to talk," Lucia said simply. "So talk." Vornak's mandibles clicked nervously. "Your attack was unexpected. Your capabilities exceed our projections. The Assembly wishes to negotiate a ceasefire." "The Assembly wishes," Lucia repeated slowly. "Not you personally. You're just here as a messenger. I speak for the Krythax sovereignty and for the majority faction within the Assembly." Vornak said stiffly. "The majority faction?" Lucia said. "Interesting. So the Assembly is divided." Vornak hesitated, and Lucia knew she had hit on something important. The Assembly was fracturing. The unity they had shown 60 years ago was breaking apart under pressure. "There are disagreements about how to handle the current situation," Vornak admitted carefully. "Some species believe we should negotiate. Others want to mobilize for total war. And some are reconsidering their membership in the Assembly entirely." "Which species are reconsidering their membership?" Lucia asked, leaning forward. "The Zendari have already announced they're leaving the Assembly. one of Vornak's advisors said quietly. The Oriathi and Lumini are considering it as well. They claim that recent revelations about assembly activities have made continued membership untenable. Lucia nodded. Elena's broadcast had done its job. The evidence of corruption had been too overwhelming for some species to ignore. The Assembly's carefully maintained image of wise, benevolent leadership had been shattered. Now they were scrambling to hold together an alliance that was coming apart at the seams. What does the Krythax sovereignty want from this negotiation? Lucia asked. A return to the status quo, Vornak said. Humanity can retain the solar perimeter and perhaps a few nearby colonies. In exchange, you cease all military operations and acknowledge Assembly authority over galactic affairs. Lucia laughed. It was a harsh sound, devoid of humor. You exile us, try to destroy us, fail completely, and now you want us to pretend it never happened. You want us to accept subordinate status after we've proven ourselves your equals or superiors. No, that offer is insulting. Then what do you want? Vornak demanded, his voice rising. Total war? The destruction of the Assembly? Do you want to conquer the galaxy? We want what we always wanted, Lucia said coldly. To be left alone to build our civilization in peace. We want our colonies back, the ones you stole from us. We want access to galactic trade and communication networks on equal terms. We want a voice in galactic governance proportional to our population and capabilities. And most importantly, we want to guarantee that no species will ever be exiled again for the crime of being successful. That's asking for a complete restructuring of galactic governance. Vornak's advisor protested. Yes, Lucia agreed. Because the current system is broken. You proved that when you exiled us. The Assembly isn't a governing body. It's a cartel designed to maintain the power of ancient species at the expense of everyone else. That needs to end. The other species will never accept this, Vornak said. You're demanding that we surrender advantages we've held for millennia. Then there will be war, Lucia said simply. And based on recent events, I like our chances. You had every advantage, superior numbers, established infrastructure, control of all trade routes, and we still defeated you in every engagement. What makes you think a longer conflict will go better for you? Before Vornak could respond, the door to the conference room opened. Envoy Elena Vasquez entered, accompanied by representatives from 4 other species. Lucia recognized them immediately. The Zendari, the Oriathi, the Lumini, and the Talviks, species that were abandoning the Assembly. I apologize for the interruption, Elena said smoothly, but I thought Arbiter Vornak should hear this directly. These 4 species have agreed to form an alliance with humanity. We're establishing a new galactic organization based on principles of equality, free trade, and technological sharing. Any species is welcome to join, regardless of age or previous affiliation. Vornak stared at her in horror. You're trying to destroy the Assembly. No, Elena said. We're offering an alternative. The Assembly can continue to exist if it wants, but it will no longer have a monopoly on galactic governance. Species will have a choice. They can stay with the old system, or they can join us in building something new. The Zendari representative, a being that resembled a crystalline humanoid, spoke through its translator. The Assembly had 60 years to reform itself. Instead, it became more corrupt, more rigid, more concerned with maintaining power than serving the galaxy. Humanity showed us that change is possible. They were exiled and came back stronger. They were isolated and became more innovative. They were written off as primitive and proved themselves advanced. They are the future. The Assembly is the past. We're not abandoning our former colleagues, the Oriathi representative added. She looked like a flowing entity of liquid light, contained within a translucent membrane. We're simply refusing to be part of a system that has betrayed its own principles. Any Assembly species that wishes to join our new alliance is welcome. We hold no grudges. We seek only justice and fairness. Vornak looked around the room, realizing he was losing this negotiation badly. The Assembly's unity was broken. Their authority was being challenged openly. And the humans, the species he had tried to destroy, were now dictating terms. What happens to the Krythax if we don't join your alliance? Vornak asked quietly. Nothing, Lucia said. You can continue as you were, but you won't have access to our new trade network. You won't benefit from our technological innovations. You won't have the same influence you once did. The galaxy is changing Arbiter. You can change with it, or you can be left behind. This is blackmail, Vornak protested. No, Elena corrected. Blackmail will be threatening to destroy you if you don't comply. We're not threatening anything. We're simply building a new system and inviting others to join. You can participate or not. That's your choice. But understand that isolation is what you impose on us, and we survived it. Can you say the same? The meeting ended without resolution. Vornak and his delegation left to consult with other assembly members. Lucia and Elena met with their new allies to begin planning the structure of their alternative organization. They decided to call it the Galactic Union, emphasizing unity and shared purpose. Over the next 3 years, the political landscape of the galaxy transformed completely. 6 more species left the Assembly to join the Union. The Assembly attempted to punish these defections by cutting off trade access, but humanity's slipfold technology made such blockades meaningless. Human ships could bypass Assembly checkpoints entirely, establishing direct trade relationships with any world that wanted them. The economic impact was immediate and devastating for the Assembly. Humanity offered better trade terms than the Assembly ever had. They shared technology instead of hoarding it. They established fair pricing instead of price fixing. Within 2 years, even species that remained loyal to the Assembly were quietly trading with Union members because the deals were simply too good to refuse. But the Assembly wasn't accepting defeat quietly. The Krythax, in particular, refused to acknowledge the new reality. Vornak convinced 7 other Assembly species to join him in a hardline faction. They began mobilizing military forces, preparing for a confrontation that would either restore Assembly authority or destroy it completely. Envoy Vasquez saw the reports of military buildup and knew the situation was reaching a crisis point. There would be one final confrontation, one last chance for the Assembly to accept change peacefully, or to force humanity to prove their superiority through overwhelming military victory. She sent a private message to Vornak, bypassing official channels to speak to him directly. Arbiter, this doesn't have to end in war. Your people aren't our enemies. It's the system that's broken, not the species within it. Join us. Help us build something better. Your experience and knowledge would be valuable in the Union. We hold no grudges against the Krythax people for the actions of their leaders. Vornak's response was bitter. You offer me a place in your new order, but only if I abandon everything my people have built. You asked me to admit that our way was wrong, that we were wrong. I cannot do that. I will not do that. Then you choose war, Elena said sadly, and many will die because of pride and stubbornness. Better to die with honor than live in submission, Vornak replied. Meanwhile, Dr. Cassandra Reeves was working on something that would make the coming conflict much shorter than anyone expected. She had spent 3 years analyzing the Assembly's military technology, looking for weaknesses to exploit. She found something remarkable. The Assembly species had become so dependent on their established technology that they had stopped innovating. Their weapons, their shields, their tactics were all centuries old, refined, but not fundamentally changed. Humanity, forced to innovate or die during the exile, had developed completely different approaches to space combat. Their weapons were more efficient. Their shields were more adaptive. Their ships were faster and more maneuverable. But Cassandra discovered something even more useful. The Assembly ships all use the same basic power generation system, Cassandra explained to Lucia during a strategy session. And that system has a vulnerability. If we hit their power cores with a specific resonance pulse, we can shut down their ships without destroying them. They'll be dead in space, crew unharmed but completely helpless. We can win battles without bloodshed. How many ships can you equip with this weapon? Lucia asked. All of them, Cassandra said with a smile. It's not complicated technology. We can retrofit our entire fleet in 4 months. Lucia looked at the tactical displays, studying the Assembly's military positions. They were building up forces near Convergence Hub, clearly preparing for a decisive battle. They expected a conventional war, fleet against fleet, hoping their numerical advantage would offset humanity's technological edge. They were in for a surprise. Captain Tanaka reviewed the battle plans and felt a mix of anticipation and dread. She had spent 60 years preparing for war. She had trained generations of pilots. She had overseen the construction of thousands of ships. And now, finally, they would see if all that preparation was enough. "Are you scared?" one of her younger officers asked. Terrified, Tanaka admitted, but also confident. "We've done everything possible to prepare. We have the better technology, the better tactics, and the better cause. If we can't win with all those advantages, we don't deserve to win." "What if they surrender?" the officer asked. "What if the assembly backs down at the last moment?" "Then we've won without firing a shot, and that will be the best outcome," Tanaka said. "But I don't think Vornak will surrender. He has too much pride. He'd rather die than admit he was wrong." She was right. For months later, as human engineers finished installing Cassandra's resonance pulse weapons on every ship in the fleet, Vornak made his move. The Assembly's hardline faction, 8 species strong, assembled the largest military force seen in centuries. 5,000 ships representing the combined might of species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia gathered near Convergence Hub. It was intended as a show of force, a demonstration that the Assembly still had power, still had authority, still deserved respect and obedience. Vornak broadcast a message to the entire galaxy. "Let it be known that the Galactic Assembly will not tolerate rebellion," he announced. "Humanity and their allies have violated centuries of established law. They have stolen territory, corrupted younger species, and threatened the stability that has kept the galaxy peaceful. We will restore order. We will restore authority. And we will show that the Assembly remains the ultimate power in this galaxy." Envoy Vasquez watched the broadcast and felt sadness rather than anger. Vornak had learned nothing. He still believed that might made right, that age granted authority, that the old ways were the only ways. He was about to learn a hard lesson about the cost of refusing to adapt. "Send our response." Elena told her communications officer. "Let him know we're coming. Let him prepare. And let the galaxy watch what happens when arrogance meets determination." The Battle of Convergence Point would be remembered as the moment the galaxy changed forever. 2 fleets faced each other in the darkness of space. On one side, 5,000 assembly ships representing millennia of established power and authority. On the other, 10,000 human and Union ships representing a new vision for the galaxy. Every inhabited world watched through captured broadcasts, waiting to see which vision would prevail. Fleet Commander Lucia Markov stood on the bridge of the Phoenix Rising, now an old woman of 84, but still sharp and determined. She looked at the tactical display, showing the assembly fleet arrayed in traditional formations. They expected a conventional battle. They expected humanity to charge forward and try to overwhelm them with numbers. They were about to be very disappointed. "All ships maintain position," Lucia ordered calmly. "Let them make the first move. I want the galaxy to see clearly who the aggressors are." Across the battlefield, Vornak stood in his command ship, surrounded by the other leaders of the hardline faction. They were confident. Their fleet was powerful. Their ships were battle-tested, and they had the blessing of history on their side. Surely these upstart humans couldn't stand against the combined might of 8 assembly species. "Advance!" Vornak ordered. "Show them the power they dare to challenge." The assembly fleet moved forward in perfect formation, a wall of steel and energy moving to crush the rebellion. It was an impressive sight, carefully choreographed to intimidate and overwhelm. They had used the same tactic against dozens of species over the centuries. It had always worked before. But humanity had 60 years to study assembly tactics. They knew what was coming. They were ready. "Wait for it," Lucia said quietly as the assembly fleet approached. "Wait until they're committed. Wait until they can't easily retreat." The assembly ships closed the weapons range and opened fire. Energy beams and missiles streaked across space toward the human formation. But the human ships didn't return fire. Instead, they activated their shields and began evasive maneuvers. Ships slipped and dodged, using their superior speed and maneuverability to avoid most of the incoming fire. The few hits that connected were absorbed by shields more advanced than anything the assembly possessed. "They're not fighting back," one of Vornak's advisors said with confusion. "Why aren't they fighting back?" "It's a trick," Vornak insisted. "They're trying to lure us into a trap. Maintain formation. Increase firepower." The assembly fleet intensified their assault, pouring more and more energy into their attacks. They were so focused on their targets that they didn't notice human ships slipping into position around them. They didn't see the trap closing until it was too late. "Now," Lucia said simply. 10,000 human ships activated Dr. Reeves's resonance pulse weapon simultaneously. The space around Convergence Point lit up with invisible energy that passed harmlessly through shields but wreaked havoc on power systems. Within seconds, 5,000 assembly ships went dark. Their engines stopped. Their weapons went offline. Their life support switched to emergency backup. They hung in space like corpses, completely helpless. On Vornak's command ship, emergency lights flickered on as the main power failed. Alarms blared. Officers shouted in confusion. The Krythax arbiter stared at his dead screens in disbelief. "What happened?" he demanded. "What did they do to us?" "Unknown weapon," his tactical officer reported. "It shut down our power core completely. We're running on emergency batteries only. All weapons offline. All propulsion offline. We're defenseless." Throughout the assembly fleet, the same scene repeated 5,000 times. Proud warships that had ruled the galaxy for centuries were now floating debris, their crews unharmed but completely defeated. And they had been defeated without a single death, without a single ship destroyed. It was the most humiliating military defeat in recorded history. Lucia opened a communication channel to the assembly fleet. Her face appeared on every emergency screen still functioning in the disabled ships. "Attention, assembly forces. You are defeated. Your weapons are disabled. Your ships are helpless. But you are alive. Your crews are unharmed. We could have destroyed you all. We chose not to. Remember that." She paused, letting that sink in. This isn't about conquest. This isn't about revenge. This is about showing you that the old ways are over. The Assembly's monopoly on power is broken. You can accept this peacefully, or we can continue this conflict until you have nothing left. The choice is yours. On Convergence Hub, the remaining Assembly members watched in stunned silence. Their military might have been neutralized in seconds. Their most powerful fleet had been defeated without firing a single effective shot. Everything they believed about their superiority, their invincibility, their right to rule had been proven false. Envoy Elena Vasquez's voice came over the communication systems. "Members of the Galactic Assembly, we're formally requesting your surrender. Not unconditional surrender. Not the humiliating terms you once imposed on us. We want a negotiated peace that respects all species involved. We want to build a new system of governance that serves everyone, not just the ancient and powerful. Will you talk with us?" There was a long silence. Then, one by one, Assembly species began responding. The Vexians announced they would negotiate. The Lumini, who had been wavering for months, formally declared they were leaving the Assembly to join the Union. The Oriathi did the same. Species that had remained neutral began sending messages requesting information about Union membership. Only Vornak and the Krythax remained defiant. From his disabled command ship, the old Arbiter broadcast one final message. "The Krythax sovereignty will never surrender primitives. We will fight to the last ship, the last warrior, the last." His broadcast was cut off as another Krythax ship, this one commanded by the defector Zevrik, moved alongside. Zevrik had spent years with humanity, learning their ways, seeing a different path for his people. Now he led a faction of Krythax who were tired of Vornak's pride, destroying their future. "Supreme Arbiter Vornak," Zevrik said formally, "on behalf of the Krythax Reform Movement, I'm placing you under arrest for reckless endangerment of our species. You led us into a war we couldn't win because of pride. You refused negotiation because of stubbornness. You risked extinction for our entire people because you couldn't admit you were wrong. This ends now." Krythak soldiers loyal to Zevrik rather than Vornak boarded the command ship and took the old arbor into custody. He didn't resist. He seemed broken, defeated, aged beyond his years. As they led him away, Vornak looked at the images of human ships surrounding his fleet and finally understood. Humanity hadn't just defeated them militarily. They had exposed the fundamental weakness of the assembly system. They had proven that age didn't grant wisdom, that tradition didn't guarantee correctness, that power built on fear and control was no power at all. The Battle of Convergence Point ended without a single death. 5,000 assembly ships were eventually towed to safe harbor, their crews released unharmed. The resonance pulse effects were temporary. Within days, the ships would be functional again, but the psychological impact was permanent. The assembly had been humiliated. Their invincibility had been shattered. Their authority was broken beyond repair. For months later, representatives from 63 species gathered on a new station built specifically for the purpose. It wasn't called Convergence Hub. That name belonged to the old order. This station was called Dawn Station, symbolizing a new beginning. They came to dissolve the Galactic Assembly and establish the Galactic Union in its place. Envoy Elena Vasquez, now 87 years old, stood before the assembly and gave the opening address. We gather here not as conquerors and conquered, but as equals. The old system is dead. We ended it not with weapons, but by proving it was unnecessary. We show that cooperation works better than control, that innovation works better than stagnation, that sharing works better than hoarding. She paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. Some were from species that had fought against humanity. Others were from allies who had stood with them. All were here because they chose to be, because they saw a better future in the Union than in the old assembly. The Union has 3 founding principles, Elena continued. First, equality. Every species has 1 vote, regardless of age or power. A species that achieved spaceflight last year has the same voice as one that has traveled the stars for 1,000,000 years. Second, transparency. All decisions, all records, all activities of the Union government will be public. No more secret deals. No more hidden corruption. Third, innovation. We will share technology freely. We will encourage advancement. We will reward creativity and problem solving. The species that contributes the most to the common good will be honored, regardless of how old or young they are. The assembly voted. 63 species approved the Union Charter. Only 9 abstained, including the Krythaks, who were still recovering from internal political upheaval. The Galactic Assembly officially dissolved itself. Some of its former members joined the Union immediately. Others chose to remain independent, but signed trade and mutual defense agreements. A few species, primarily those farthest from human space, chose to wait and watch before committing. Fleet Commander Lucia Markov retired after the vote, finally able to rest after 60 years of preparation and conflict. She moved to a small colony on Proxima Centauri. The first world humans had colonized outside the solar perimeter centuries ago. She spent her remaining years writing her memoirs, teaching at the local university, and watching children play in parks that she had helped protect. Captain Yuki Tanaka took over as head of Union Defense Forces. She oversaw the transformation of human military might from a force built for revenge into one built for protection. She trained a new generation of officers from dozens of species, teaching them human tactics and philosophy while learning from their unique perspectives. Dr. Cassandra Reeves received the first Union Medal of Innovation for her development of slipfold technology and the resonance pulse weapon that had won the final battle without bloodshed. She continued working until her death at 96. Always pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Her final project was a new form of power generation that would make energy practically free for any world in the Union. The Krythaks underwent a political revolution. Zevrik became the new leader of the sovereignty after free elections, the first in Krythak's history. He formally apologized to humanity for the exile and requested Union membership. The application was approved unanimously. The Krythaks proved to be valuable members, their organizational skills and work ethic contributing greatly to Union projects. As for Vornak, he lived out his days in comfortable confinement on a neutral world. He wasn't executed. He wasn't tortured. He was simply kept away from power, given time to think about his choices and their consequences. Visitors noted that he spent his final years watching broadcasts from Union worlds, seeing the prosperity and peace that could have existed 60 years earlier if he had chosen cooperation over confrontation. 7 years after Battle Convergence Point, the Union had grown to 100 member species. Trade flourished. Technology advanced at rates not seen in millennia. New worlds were colonized under fair agreements that respected all parties. The galaxy, which had been stagnant under assembly rule, was now dynamic and growing. Elena Vasquez stepped down as Union Secretary General, passing leadership to a younger human named Dr. James Okafor. At her retirement ceremony, representatives from every member species came to honor her. She had lived to see humanity go from exiled outcasts to respected leaders. She had watched the galaxy transform from a place of rigid hierarchy to one of opportunity and growth. "I'm often asked if I hate the Assembly for what they did to us," Elena said in her final speech. "The truth is, I don't. They gave us the greatest gift possible, though they didn't intend to. They forced us to become stronger. They forced us to innovate. They forced us to prove ourselves. Without the exile, humanity might have become complacent, might have accepted our place as junior members of someone else's system. Instead, we built our own system. We created something better. So thank you, arbiters, wherever you are. You tried to destroy us and instead made us great." 30 years after the exile ended, a remarkable scene played out on New Eden, the world where Elena's brother had died defending during the evacuation. In a public park built on the ruins of the old Assembly Administration building, children of 8 different species played together. A human girl and a young Krythax were building a structure out of blocks. A Zendari child floated nearby, offering suggestions. A Luminese seedling and a Vexian larva competed in some game that involved rolling colorful spheres. An old human woman watched them play, tears streaming down her weathered face. She remembered when this world had been taken from humanity. She remembered the Krythax soldiers who had occupied it. She remembered the anger and hatred that had consumed her for decades. Now she watched children who would grow up never knowing that old division. They would know only cooperation, only friendship, only the possibility of a shared future. That was the true victory. Not the military conquest, not the political transformation, not even the economic prosperity. The real victory was in these children who saw each other as friends rather than enemies, as equals rather than superior and inferior, as fellow travelers in a vast galaxy rather than competing species fighting over scraps. 60 years after the exile began, humanity celebrated Victory Day across all Union worlds. It wasn't a celebration of military triumph, though that was part of the story. It was a celebration of survival, of adaptation, of refusing to accept defeat. It was a celebration of everything that made humanity special. Their stubbornness, their creativity, their ability to turn disaster into opportunity. Envoy Vasquez, long since retired, gave one final interview on Victory Day. She was 107 years old, her body frail, but her mind still sharp. The interviewer asked her what she was most proud of from her long career. "I'm proud that we didn't become monsters," Elena said quietly. "We could have. We had every justification for revenge. We could have destroyed the Krythax. We could have enslaved the species that oppressed us. We could have built an empire on the ruins of the Assembly. Instead, we built something better. We proved that even when humanity is at its lowest point, even when we have every reason to embrace hatred and violence, we can choose a better path. That is what I'm most proud of." She died peacefully in her sleep 3 months later, surrounded by family. Her funeral was attended by representatives from every Union species. Humans and Krythax stood side by side at her grave, united in honoring a woman who had given her life to building a better galaxy. The galaxy she left behind was unrecognizable from the one she had been born into. The rigid hierarchy of the Assembly was gone, replaced by the fluid cooperation of the Union. Technology that had been hoarded for centuries was now shared freely. Young species rose to prominence based on merit rather than waiting millennia for permission. Innovation flourished. Art and culture blossomed as different species learned from each other. The Union expanded slowly but steadily, always through invitation rather than conquest. By the 60th anniversary of its founding, it included over 300 species and governed half the galaxy. The remaining independent species watched carefully, many gradually recognizing that the Union model worked better than the alternatives. On Earth, in a museum dedicated to the exile period, there hung a famous piece of artwork. It showed Fleet Commander Markov's flagship, the Phoenix, rising, facing down the Assembly fleet at the Battle of Convergence Point. The caption read, "They tried to exile humanity to watch us die. Instead, they forced us to become stronger. We didn't take the galaxy by force. We won it by showing what free people can achieve." And in a quiet corner of that same museum, there was a small plaque with words that Elena Vasquez had spoken on the day of the exile, words that had become the unofficial motto of the Union. Humans do not surrender. We adapt. We survive. We prevail. And we remember those who wronged us, not to seek revenge, but to ensure we never allow such injustice again. The galaxy had learned that lesson the hard way. Perhaps, but they had learned it. And in learning it, they had become something better than what came before. In a small apartment on Dawn Station, an elderly Krythax sat watching a documentary about the exile. His name was Vornak, and he had once been the most powerful member of the Galactic Assembly. Now, he was simply a prisoner who had been granted limited freedom in his final years due to good behavior and deteriorating health. He watched as the documentary showed human ships returning to reclaim their colonies. He watched footage of the Battle of Convergence Point, seeing his own defeat from an outside perspective. He watched interviews with humans who had suffered during the exile, who had lost family members, who had struggled with poverty and desperation. And for the first time in his long life, Vornak truly understood what he had done. A knock came at his door. Vornak shuffled to answer it, his once imposing form now bent with age. Outside stood a human woman in her 70s, dressed in the simple uniform of Union administration. She looked at him with eyes that held no hatred, only curiosity. "Supreme Arbiter Vornak?" she asked. "Just Vornak now," he said quietly. "I hold no titles anymore. What do you want?" "My name is Maya Vasquez." "Markov," the woman said. "Elena Vasquez was my mother. Fleet Commander Lucia Markov was my other mother. I work as a liaison between former Assembly species and Union integration programs. I wanted to meet you before you died." Vornak felt something cold settle in his chest. To gloat? To see the monster who tried to destroy your people? "No," Maya said simply. "To understand. My mother Elena always said that enemies aren't born. They're made by circumstances and choices. I wanted to understand what circumstances and choices led you to exile humanity. I wanted to see if there was something I could learn that might prevent future conflicts." Vornak stared at her for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in. I'm old. I'm dying, and I have nothing left to lose by being honest." They sat in his small living room. Vornak prepared tea in the Krythax style, a ritual that helped him organize his thoughts. Then he began to speak, and once he started, he couldn't stop. He told her about the fear that had driven the Assembly's decision. Fear that humanity's rapid advancement would upset the careful balance of power. Fear that other young species would be inspired to challenge the status quo. Fear that the comfortable order that had existed for millennia would crumble. "We weren't evil," Vornak said. "We were afraid, and fear makes cowards of us all. We saw your potential, and instead of embracing it, instead of learning from it, we tried to crush it. We told ourselves it was for the good of the galaxy. We convinced ourselves that maintaining order justified any action. But really, we were just protecting our own positions. Why are you telling me this?" Maya asked. "Because your mother was right," Vornak said in her retirement speech. She said the exile was a gift because it forced you to become stronger. But it was also a lesson about what happens when the powerful try to suppress the ambitious, when the old try to stop the young, when fear guides policy instead of wisdom. He looked at her directly. The Union will face the same choice someday. A young species will rise that threatens your comfortable position. You will be afraid. You will be tempted to do what we did. When that day comes, remember us. Remember what fear cost us. Choose differently." Maya nodded slowly. "I will remember. And I'll make sure others remember too." Vornak died 4 weeks later, peacefully in his sleep. At his request, his body was cremated and his ashes scattered on a Krythax colony world that had been built using Union cooperation programs, a world that would not have existed under the old assembly system. In death, Vornak became part of the new order he had once fought against. The galaxy continued turning. New species achieved spaceflight and were welcomed into the Union as equals. Ancient mysteries were explored by mixed species research teams. Conflict arose, as they always do, but they were resolved through negotiation and compromise rather than force. The Union wasn't perfect. No system created by imperfect beings could be, but it was better than what came before, and it continued improving with each passing generation. On the anniversary of Elena Vasquez's death, now observed as Unity Day throughout the Union, Maya Vasquez Markov gave a speech at the Museum on Earth. She stood before the painting of the Phoenix, rising facing the assembly fleet, and told the story of her final meeting with Vornak. "My mother taught me that the greatest victory isn't in defeating your enemies, but in helping them understand why they were wrong," Maya said. Vornak spent the last years of his life understanding. He saw what the galaxy became without the assembly's rigid control. He saw Krythax and humans working together, building together, living together, and he realized that the future he feared was actually better than the past he had tried to preserve. She paused, looking at the faces in crowd. Humans, Krythax, Zendari, Lumini, and dozens of other species, all gathered to remember the woman who had led them to their darkest time, to their brightest future. The exile was meant to be humanity's end, Maya concluded. Instead, it became our beginning, not just for us, but for the entire galaxy, because we proved that change is possible. That old systems can be replaced with better ones. That defeat can become victory if you refuse to surrender. And most importantly, that the measure of a civilization isn't in how it treats the powerful, but in how it treats those it once considered beneath notice. My mother used to say that humanity's greatest strength wasn't our technology or our weapons or even our stubbornness. It was our ability to imagine a better future and then work to make it real. The assembly couldn't imagine a galaxy without their control. We imagined it, built it, and invited them to join us. That is the true lesson of the exile. Not that humans are special or superior, but that anyone can build something better if they have the courage to try. The crowd erupted in applause that lasted for several minutes. When it finally died down, Maya added one final thought. Today, we celebrate not the end of the assembly, but the beginning of the Union. Not humanity's victory over the Krythax, but our victory together over the systems that divided us. And we remember Elena Vasquez, Lucia Markov, Cassandra Reeves, and all the others who refused to let humanity die quietly. They showed us the way. Now it's our responsibility to keep walking that path, to keep building that better future for ourselves and for generations yet to come. That night, across hundreds of worlds in the Union, people looked up at the stars and felt hope instead of fear. They saw not territories to conquer or resources to exploit, but possibilities to explore and wonders to discover. They saw a galaxy that was finally living up to its potential, where any species could rise as high as their abilities and determination could take them. And somewhere in that vast darkness, in a small colony on the edge of Union space, a human child and a Krythax child looked through a telescope at distant galaxies and made plans to explore them together when they grew up. They didn't know about the exile. They didn't know about the war. They didn't know about the hatred that had once divided their species. They only knew that they were friends, that the stars were beautiful, and that the future was theirs to shape however they chose. And really, that was all they needed to know. That was the legacy of the exile. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not conquest or domination, but the simple, revolutionary idea that everyone deserved a chance to reach for stars, and that we reach farther together than we ever could alone. The exile had ended. The Union had begun. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The camera pulls back from Earth, through the solar system, through human space, through Union territory, showing hundreds of worlds connected by streams of light, ships traveling freely through slipfold space. The view continues expanding until we see the entire galaxy, half of it glowing with the lights of Union civilization, the other half gradually joining in. The screen fades black. For more such thrilling science fiction stories, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Starborn Tales.